Hi, thanks for bearing with us. I'm Justin Parsher. If you don't know me already, I'm an assistant professor of practice here in the landscape architecture section. Tonight it's my great pleasure to introduce Ross Altheimer and Maura Rockcastle from 10 by 10. Now, in the process of sort of reviewing what there is to know about 10 by 10, one thing that I've been struck by over and over again is just how much they have in common with what we do in the building here, and how much we share a context, share a home together. And one big place to start with that is just being based in the Midwest. 10 by 10 is coming to us from the Twin Cities today, and they've worked all throughout Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Nebraska, all of which has not stopped them from also ranging as far afield as Rwanda. Like us, they are passionate about materials, and it was a great pleasure to get to walk them through a bit of the accreditation exhibit, which you all should check out if you have not already, where you see that same love for materials and tactility. And one thing that might strike you if you go to their website, you will see pictures of them sort of brandishing stones at you. And this to me is like a big part of the brand. This manifests in part in a process-oriented version of practice where they are very upfront about making the time to engage with site. And like us here in the building, they find that often that means making things with their hands through a series of what they themselves have called, quote, weird experiments with materials that might decay, grow, change, and persist. They've used that deep love, that curiosity about materials to put into practice ideas that are near and dear to our hearts. And that might be anything from reclaiming materials to make new disturbance-adapted public spaces to even rewilding former golf courses. And they see all that way of practicing as a challenge to the, quote, normative environment of professional practice. And what they offer instead would be immersive, resilient landscapes that adapt to social, economic, and environmental transformations. Speaking of that, one thing that sets 10 by 10 apart is that, in part, because you're dealing with a firm that was founded in 2015, they've been working from the very beginning to deeply root best practices in equity into the well-established template of being a design-forward professional landscape architecture firm. So they've used their expertise to join and further efforts in their own community, anything from planning new development with the Little Mekong community in St. Paul to creating a garden to honor the memory of Philando Castile. They have developed expertise in working with Native American tribes to honor their heritage and speak to their persistence today. So they've worked with the Ute Mountain Ute tribe and the Flandreau Sioux tribe, along with a whole coalition of tribes and other stakeholders at the Indian Mounds Cultural Landscape in St. Paul, where they've been, in a really inspiring way, working on reshaping the expectation that a site like this be treated as a conventional public park at all. So in light of all this, it was really fantastic to see that back in February, they received the recognition of being honored by the Architectural League of New York as one of their 2024 Emerging Voices. We're thrilled to have them here. Please join me in welcoming 10 by 10.
Thank you, Justin. Can you all hear me? Okay.
Can you all hear me? Okay.
That was so nice. I just have to say, like, when somebody takes the time to actually not just read the bio and it's like digs through the work, it's so meaningful. Thank you. That was really nice.
Could you just do that one more time?
We're really excited to be here today, so thank you so much for inviting us. When we were talking a couple weeks ago about what we wanted to talk about, these lectures are a great chance for us to sort of test some ideas, share some new work, reword some things, and maybe we've been struggling getting out clearly. So we titled this lecture for you all, Threads. There's a couple things that feel like as fibers through our work are getting stronger, are weaving themselves more powerfully through the work and are showing up in different ways. So we wanted to sort of use this lecture as a way of identifying a couple of those and thinking a little bit more about those. So there's a few of them here. The first one being experimenting. As you heard, and if you've looked at our website, this is very much something that has been with us from the beginning. We both sort of, in deciding to do this firm together, shared our artwork. We're both have a kind of background in fine arts and have used sort of experimentation and tactile studies as a way of learning ourselves and testing representation and understanding sites. So this is a very recent cyanotype we did down by the river in Minneapolis, using water as the medium that is making the imprint on the image. And it's a very dynamic process that changes over the hours that you're working out there on the site. And it's a beautiful sort of way to set up a sequence of these things, come and go, and use the materials of the site to create these sort of echoes or images. Remembering, memory, kind of questions about how do we access our memory, both how do we find the sort of traces of memory on a site while we're exploring, and then also how do you translate that into the design itself. These are casts, clay casts from Mill 19, one of our very first projects in 2016, where we actually got stopped at the airport because we had too much volumes of clay. They thought we were maybe making a bomb. I don't know, but we sort of cut these.
I thought it was a great idea to bring clay in my backpack and not tell them.
And wire.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, but kind of just using these and pushing them up against different parts of the mill, pieces that had the soot from the steel making still embedded in them that were very dirty. And I think this just active question of sensory abundance, of how do we access memory? How do we help other people access memories through sensory abundance in the design work itself, in the tactile qualities of the projects that we're making and putting out in the world. Knowing, this idea of ways of knowing or spending time sort of kind of go hand in hand. This is from that same sort of cyanotype process down on the river a couple weeks ago, working with some algae and just zooming in. You can see the feather up there for scale. For a moment, you're maybe not anywhere in scale, and then the feather brings you back. But this idea of spending time is a commitment we make, even if it's not local, although local projects do make this much easier. Spending time as a way of getting to know these places, sort of eliminating biases and just being, listening, and doing experiments like this that sort of allow us to see differently, hear differently, and learn from the site in different ways is another one of these threads. Feeling or tactile knowledge sort of also touches on the humanity embedded in the work we do. So I think this is something we've been talking about a lot, especially as we think about not just the design process for the projects, but the design question of our practice. How are we organizing? How are we trying to break different modes of professional practice in the way that we work together as people? And then the way that we're engaging with our clients. So again, like using these materials to tell stories, to again, recall memory, and to connect, to touch things, to have conversations in different ways is another thread. I think the final one is this idea of relating or relations, relationship. It's again about sort of this work we do being really important about our own relationships with each other and our partnerships with clients and community members, collaborators, and then also, I think, relationship again with the land. And it all sort of stems back to, again, these different ways of kind of interactivity or experimentation, kind of tactile processes that then embed themselves in the work.
And maybe one thing to add there too is, as Justin's talking about, we are Midwest based. We are, solidly go Midwest. We are solidly in Minneapolis and invested in our community. And I think we've learned a lot working within the Twin Cities and the region and showing up as part of the community, invested in the community. It's a very different way of working. And I will say, as everyone had seen the shifts in the world through the pandemic and racial reckoning, being in Minneapolis during that time, I think, and having a landscape practice and some of the stories we were able to be engaged with in communities, I think really shifted our work, or really continued our work. I would say we kind of set a course. So that idea of relating to place, being invested in places is super important.
Switch for a sec.
Sure. Yeah.
We've got a kind of complicated setup here, so
we'll keep it interesting, because we're going to shift sometimes. So if you're sleeping, you'll wake up when you see that, so you know. So of course, here's a photograph of our team. I mean, I think we're really lucky. One of the things about our culture is we like to have a lot of fun whenever possible. But also we take the work seriously. We know we're not surgeons. There isn't necessarily life on the line, but in ways there is life on the line. But so we're right now 17 total. We doubled during the pandemic. We're still trying to catch up with ourselves a little bit. We're women-led and women-owned. I think 75% of our practice are women, and we're really proud of that. And we're continuing, I think, to find joy in the work and to find these cultivate relationships with one another. I think that's really important in this aspect of feeling. We do a lot of work around communications trainings, so we can show up for each other in our communities as well, which I think is really important. This is something that we started with and we continue to. I think this was a slide out of our first lecture. But for us, we really established at the beginning, we wanted to find a way of working that considers and confronts the issues of our time, of which there are many. And you'll see how that plays out through the values of our work. But this is something that we hold. We understand the complexity of things, the pain in our communities, the grief we have about sort of climate shifts. And so, but we are also optimists. We feel like this is why we practice. This is what we are after. And so how we work matters, in our office and when we work in communities and in collaborations. This idea of transparency, being in constant dialogue. We value mentorship, the idea of collective ownership, trust, gratitude, compassion, and most importantly, love. And I think leading with that, you'll see, on the feelings, Maura and I are oftentimes the first to come to tears when there's something joyful or something painful. So we certainly have, for better or worse, established that as part of our culture.
So a couple kind of key process-based parts of our approach are important to walk through. And then we're going to walk through 4 projects. We might have to trim that down a little bit because I know we started a little late and we tend to talk too much in the beginning. But our process often begins with a question. We talked a little bit about this in Justin's class today, but questions are really fundamental to that process. So in believing that they are a way of initiating dialogue, of being open-ended and establishing this position around process, the questions that we're asking are kind of embedded in, I don't know if any of you have read Kaina Lesky's book, Storm of Creativity, but she talks a lot about asking questions. This sort of agitation in order to know is a spark and it's a generator. And we very much love that and embody that and feel, have kind of lived that in how we work. So that intentionality around questioning puts us in a position of not knowing and of being comfortable with that and of working through kind of active unlearning as we get to know sites. The next one is curiosity, which is sort of all folded in also with imagination and openness, optimism. It's kind of a mindset and for us an action. I think, again, it goes back to this idea of probing and not proving. Our colleague Karen Lutsky and Sean Burkholder have written about this a lot as well. I think we also love reading the work of our kind of academics and our partners and sort of are trying to connect these two worlds, not leave this stuff behind when you leave school. It is what we do. We try to practice this, as you can see, actively every day. But again, these are generative points of departure. And the creative methods that we sort of have developed from this, are the next slide, kind of have a bunch of different formats and tools that have emerged over the last 9 years. So these creative methods really are everything from casting, film and video, drawing with mud or with the water down by the river, taking castings, tactile kind of records, using photography in a lot of mostly serial ways, but using photography as a way to sort of pull you, move your body through a site, record that, understand what about that was powerful. Are you moving towards light? Are you moving towards plants? Are you moving towards protection or thresholds? Working again with sediments and ink, collecting materials in different ways. So these are also all productive ways not only of starting the design process and asking questions, but oftentimes engaging with communities as well. They can be collectors, they can be photographers, and actually that's a way of sort of triggering new stories in their mind to share with us. And the last theme is idea of truth. Of course, weaves itself through everything we do. There are layers to the sites we're working on that are complex, that have histories that are often painful or traumatic, sometimes are hidden. I grew up in Minneapolis. I did not know the story of our kind of Dakota peoples. I wasn't taught that story in school. I mean, you can find it at the Historical Society, but there was so much we've learned in the last 10 years that is somewhat, profound. But I think asking the question of who we're listening to, how are we listening in these processes, and how transparent can we be? So this final idea about compassion and embracing transparency is also, again, very much embedded in how we're organizing it as an office, how we're sharing with our employees financial and organizational decisions and layers. And then also that shows up in how we collaborate, how we talk about the practice and the work with our collaborators and our communities as well.
So, our mission and our vision are super important to us. We say we're a mission-driven firm, and we believe that. We also co-created these 10 values. I know Justin was asking about this, about what is 10 by 10 and how do people riff on 10, and so oftentimes there's a lot of just 10s in the office. So this is something we take very seriously. I think we've been lucky enough, I think, to be able to live our vision and mission through the projects that we've had in the last 9 years. This is something we hold dear, I think, in the office, and I think it's a reason why a lot of people want to come work with us, whether it's employees or communities or cultural institutions, and feel like it holds us accountable as well to the work that we're doing. So the first project I want to talk about here is actually an early 10 by 10 project. It's Rondo Commemorative Plaza. And this is a photo of some of the protests on 35W after George Floyd's murder. This project is about sort of reconstructing and reconciling kind of like a really tragic history in the Rondo community in St. Paul. Rondo was a part of sort of a larger network of about 280 cities and communities that were impacted by the Federal Highway and Defense Act of 1956, of which there were $280 billion that were spent crisscrossing the nation with highways. And a lot of, you see a lot of diagrams, there's a lot of sort of history that's written. Rondo is a really important story that is like every story. There's 280 or 500 or 1,000 stories that are similar to Rondo. So we were approached by some of our collaborators, Formula Architects, who are working directly with some of the founders of Rondo Avenue Inc., who were children of Rondo, and then they were the grandchildren of Rondo. This was a collaboration we had sort of early on that we had established with them. And oftentimes, when we're working with collaborators too, we try to share these questions, or the act of like sharing questions and questions back and forth. And so this was sort of a way of beginning for us and for them, a way of approaching or framing, the Rondo Commemorative Plaza. So in this case, how can a design process help communities, past and present, through building a civic space of hope and remembrance? And how do you support others in the telling of their own story? So a little bit more about Rondo. It was a thriving Black community, one of 8 communities that was sort of an archipelago of Black communities in the Twin Cities. It sort of self-supported, had its own grocery stores, butchers, churches, social clubs, everything. It was a thriving community that had been growing and growing. It was the largest Black community in Minnesota. During the sort of freeway planning, this began in 1956, the Rondo was targeted for a freeway to come through. I mean, it's really hard to describe the loss and impact of the freeway to Rondo, and even this purple line coming through. But Rondo lost 700 homes and 300 businesses in the process. One of our clients, the client that runs Rondo Avenue Inc., is one of the children in that middle picture. Also important to note, the act of deconstruction was a long one. For 12 years, actually, that line that you just saw was under construction or and paused based on how funding was sort of coming in. So in order to keep that, the project earthwork and demolition, was subcontracted in various ways, and so basically the community saw, this sort of transition of land, and so this initial one, they removed all the homes and, of course, kept the trees. But it was also strange that, the federal government would pay local municipalities 90% of the cost of the freeway construction and 90% of all urban renewal projects. So there was a big incentive for them to do these things. So as I mentioned, so the founder of Rondo Avenue Inc., our client that was in that middle picture, is sitting on the stump here watching the community just be forever altered. Okay, happy Earth story. Rondo Avenue Inc. was formed in the 80s. There's Floyd and Marvin that are there on the left. They got a formal apology from the city of St. Paul and a $200,000 sort of apology. They also got a formal apology from the Department of Transportation, no dollars attached to that. So they had to basically fundraise for a space that they wanted to build this plaza on. They've also been hosting Rondo Days, which is where they bring all the community back that was a part of this, that was a part of Rondo, that lives all over the states, back to Rondo. These were some of the early sort of experimental methods we were testing. We were trying to look at this site being adjacent to the freeway. Was a former sort of VFW, had just been cleared. There was a community garden there. It's like 40 feet by 100 feet. And so for us, just trying to understand this adjacency, so starting to take decibel readings to figure out what the sound level was. Driving around in a wagon with a ladder is handy. So here's someone who's taking decibel readings at various levels, but also trying to just see across the site. What can you see when you're raised up 3 feet? And so through lots of collaboration with our partners in translation of some of these initial site readings, we came to kind of four acts on the site. The idea of recording in the form of a community chime that was designed by artist Setu Jones. The idea of cutting, creating a plaza, gathering space for the community to come back to. The idea of elevating, creating a landform to connect and also disconnect from the sound, and a beacon that people could see from the community and from the freeway that Rondo was still here. So here's a better view of that site adjacent to the freeway. One of the beautiful things about this was actually the neighbor is the one that maintains the site. On that yellow line on the wall there is sort of the community history. So people can come and find their own identity, their stories, and their families. Next, there's a picture of Marvin with some of the kids in the neighborhood talking about the story of Rondo. So a way of keeping that story alive, a way of sharing that, a way of reestablishing identity. The site was also a former VFW, was a gathering place, so making furniture that people could come and sit in. And Marvin said they wanted a place for people to sit around all day and watch the sunset. So that was a really important piece of this project as well. The site also acts as stormwater infrastructure for the neighborhood. So we got grants from the watershed, two of the watershed districts to filter water before it goes into the stormwater system. So it actually acts as also, as infrastructure. And then it's sort of an open-ended place to play, a place to program, a place that's, again, that has become kind of the heart of this neighborhood, and is also a stop along the parade route as well. Another sort of beautiful part of this, Marvin continued his work. It's continuing his work. He bought the building just behind here to create sort of another community center, and then he started another nonprofit called Reconnect Rondo. They're actually making plans to build a land bridge right now, and to capture some of the federal transportation funding that's sort of coming through. And so we keep watching this project, and we're excited to see what happens with Marvin and his dreams.
Okay, so the next project is Historic Fort Snelling at Baumer. We're working on a handful of projects on the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers. All of them are culturally significant to the 4 Dakota tribes, federally recognized Dakota tribes in Minnesota, as well as other sort of tribes who moved through that area. But our partners are stemming from those Dakota tribes. This site at Baumer is culturally significant because this convergence of the Mississippi and Minnesota rivers is the sort of their creation story, one of many creation stories. It's sort of their people were born from this confluence of waters. And there's a lot of things that we're doing as we hear these stories just to test representation. Also, how do we hold what we're hearing from these communities and find a way to draw it, to honor it as we talk about the project, both back to them or in a lecture like this? What is important that they've shared with us that we can then kind of share as a fundamental part of the project? So these projects are for Fort Snelling. Our client was the Minnesota History Center, or the Minnesota Historical Society, rather, and the Dakota Community Council. So they had formed a co-creation partnership, the DCC, as I'll call them. We're kind of a volunteer group of Dakota partners, educators, activists, teachers, artists, writers, all came together, sort of were paid as a formal partnership to influence all of the sites within the 1805 treaty area. And Fort Snelling, which is kind of right in the middle of this map, right near Weetatonka, where Pike Island is, was the site for this project. So they were at the table from beginning to end, guiding the project. Some of the driving questions for us on this are kind of all connected to the idea that they taught us about a worldview that is called Mitakue Oasin, or all my relations, all of my relatives. And it describes a kind of notion of this profound respect and responsibility to the natural world that is very unique to the tribes and is difficult for many of us to comprehend really what that means. So our questions were, what is our role, similar to Rondo, in telling stories that are not our own? And how can landscape reveal truth and build kinship? We have a lot of collaborators. Also, we've got Dakota team members or artists, writers on our teams for these projects. We're working with the tribal historic preservation officers within each of the tribes, and are trying to engage with these individuals differently with each project. We have to start every project with the question to them of how they want to be involved, and understand, learn from lessons, past projects, whether we need to sort of change course. But there's never a case where we do the same thing over and over, and each of these sites usually demands a slightly different way of engaging with these partners. Most of them always involve way more time on site than you'd planned for, and actually being on site and talking about the things that are important to these partners is the best way to have these conversations and to kind of, again, listen to stories and embed them in the projects. So this confluence of the rivers, Bdote, as I mentioned, is the center of Dakota spirituality and their sort of creation story. It is also a place of pain and trauma. This is a site where 1,700, mostly women and children, were forced, Dakota women and children were forced into a concentration camp as part of the US-Dakota War. Many others were loaded onto steamboats just downriver and sent to reservations in South Dakota or Nebraska, Oklahoma. And this is also a site where several chiefs were hung. So it is both a place of kind of genesis and genocide. And it was kind of critical for us in this project to honor all of these layers of stories. There's also, you saw a photo of Harriet and Dred Scott. There's also a kind of slavery story embedded in the fort, military stories. There's Japanese American stories embedded here. And so for us on the project, while we had Dakota Partners as our client, it was our job to be able to better tell all of those many layers of stories in the landscape. I think this is an important map to show, just as one of the only maps we have that isn't created by a kind of city or an agency or really a kind of white partner that is honoring the many different layers and names and relationships our Dakota partners have with this larger river valley landscape. So when we think about representation and language and names, I mean, again, this is something we're representationally trying to test how to show all these deeper layers. This is more of an archaeological kind of layers over time drawing with the shifts in the river, infrastructure. So you're seeing in orange all of the layers of the military history over time. Of course, the deeper layers that are maybe tied with how this river is changing of indigenous history are harder to draw, harder to know. Were not recorded in the same way. And then you have, again, all of this infrastructure that's continually changing on top of all of this. There's also, I think, again, that question of how to draw some of these layers that are intangible. They're sacred or cultural layers. We've started moving towards watercolors or other ways of representing that are less focused on lines and boundaries or maps. Trying to think about that kind of fluidity of edge or a lack of edge, of boundary, what is sacred, what is not, and how can we better represent these in our work as landscape architects. So that's both plan, this is also sort of section. Yes, there is a geological section, a water flow, a relationship of top of a mound and a river and springs, but there's also cultural stories that connect all these things. Even to the stars that are important, and how, again, do we honor this and begin to design this into a landscape? This was the concept diagram for Fort Snelling. Again, a couple of questions, but how does the design really capture the meaning of this place? The river is a paramount, fundamental story to be told here, and these layers of human history over time. How can the landscape inspire kinship? So again, weaving that river story, the human history story, and the idea of change over time. And this notion of weaving really came from our partners wanting to understand how can we move through this landscape not in a militaristic way, not on straight lines with clear kind of axes, but in a way that actually moves to and from the edge of the bluff, that allows us to see the river, then go back through the prairie, in the way that feels more organic or intuitive. So we sort of took those prompts and those stories and actually redesigned that or designed that into the future new landscape on the site. So what you see here, they're in the center where there's more green and it says Native Prairie Restoration. There used to be a subterranean visitor center there that was removed. The parking lot was much bigger. While it still feels huge, it is a small sort of victory that we were able to reduce it to this footprint and kind of reclaim as much landscape as possible. You see kind of in the middle this welcome plaza. There is a bronze inlay of the river of Bedote. In that location, it's surrounded by sort of pockets of limestone you'll see in the photos in a second, where this story of Bedote, of the importance of the river, is the first story now you see and hear on the site. You no longer go to a subterranean big concrete visitor center. You understand this place is Dakota homeland first, and then you're sort of pulled into the landscape, not in a straight line dominant pathway to the fort, which is like that triangular thing on the right side of the screen, and to these old barracks buildings, but you're pulled to the river, you're pulled through all of this prairie restoration, bluff edge restoration landscape in a much different way. A lot of the planting that was done is all working with kind of research of plants that were there that were documented by the military predominantly, and then are now in the kind of DNR, National Park Service libraries. Research, and then research and overlays from our Dakota partners. So there's filled with culturally significant plants that are all about reflection, healing, kind of even foraging and food. So a lot of us don't recognize the power of some of these plants or the story or uses of some of these plants, but you can see a sort of swath of sage, of blue stem. There's sweetgrass in here. You smell them as a kind of indigenous person, you know they start to care for you in a different way. This is what we were told. So these are all sort of designed and embedded based on these requests by our partners. You can see that river inlay in the ground. There's a couple gathering spaces working with limestone, kind of erasing, couldn't fully erase some of the foundations from that old visitor center. That kind of concrete plinth was a part of that. It's now integrated into the integrity of the geology below. But just erasing and sort of folding as much of this more organic form as possible into the landscape, maximizing that prairie restoration, giving views of the river back to the experience. That whole edge was all concrete wall. Honoring spaces where tragedy or violent acts have happened in ways that are respectful and subtle. They're not all signed. There's not an interpretive panel saying why this particular spot is important, but this was the site of the hanging of 2 chiefs. So this sort of slab that can host ceremony and fire is not something that we tell the public or that is on a sign, but is known, that's how it can be used by the tribes. So they kind of co-design this. There's also a berm and more of that sacred planting. Trees and some other evergreen shrubs will grow up over time to screen that dominant view of the fort beyond. So yeah, just ways of kind of moving through, honoring how this landscape, you can keep going, we'll kind of speed up here, can begin to, again, hold this restoration, pull these cultural plants to the forefront, and begin to interpret and tell different stories. Another one of the stories that our partners wanted us to tell was the 1805 treaty itself. There is a phrase within that treaty that they all know by heart. So we took that phrase because there are several key pieces of it. Sorry, that's popping off of the screen there, that have not been upheld, as is the case with so many of, I mean, almost all, maybe arguably all the treaties between the US government and tribes. They're not honored, they're not being honored. So this particular sentence, the United States promises on their part to permit the Sioux to pass, repass, hunt, or make other uses of said districts as they have formally done, was not upheld. And the pieces of that, the word promises, the word to permit, to pass, repass, or hunt, those are the pieces of that treaty that were not upheld. You can see how in this sort of wall scrim, those words are skewed. They're on these sort of slats that are tilted. You have to actually move your body and move around this thing to read them. And that this whole sort of idea of interpreting the importance of this as a barrier, it prevented individuals from accessing the landscape, from doing these things that were promised to them, as a way of making physical, making experiential this experience. Some of the details of that, a lot of interpretation about the plants, the cultural significance, working with All Dakota Partners to do that writing and the artwork, and then kind of telling the story in as many sort of places as possible without adding additional objects into the landscape to take away from its more natural character. So I want to just acknowledge that it is maybe one more.
Yeah, I can move through this fast.
Okay, we're going to do this one real fast, 5 minutes, and then we'll have questions.
I think, as Maura mentioned before, she was talking about sort of interpretive work in that project. So interpretive work, we've had many discoveries over the last 9 years. We're getting into wayfinding, interpretive work. We do some public art. We design architecture that doesn't have any systems in it. So it's been a really, so when we say interdisciplinary, and we have people who are graphic designers, artists, trained as architects, landscape architects, ecologists. So it's been a really fun sort of experiment. And I would say that the Treetop Trail is one of those projects where we've been able to do more of that sort of experimentation. So this is a video from the old monorail, which was the site of this project. This monorail is about 1.25 miles long. We were invited. Oh, thank you. Water, good idea. We were invited to this project by Snow Krylik Architects. This was probably one of the most collaborative projects we've ever been a part of. It's hard to tell whose work was sort of where. It was, and we do this a lot, I think, in our work, which we kind of combine as sort of a big team. You can see this image here. This was the original sort of vision of the zoo. This was done by Roger Martin and InterDesign in the 70s as the suburbs were growing. Thank you, Freeways, for that. 500 acres was set aside. Activists organized to get this zoo built for environmental reasons, and also to try to teach people about animals in the world. Lance Wyman did some of the graphic design for this, just beautiful sort of work, iconic work. Also the monorail, like a utopian vision that never really played out well at the zoo either. You can see the monorail passing through over water and with solar panels in the sort of 70s. The solar panels didn't produce much energy. They had trouble keeping that water clean, and they had trouble keeping the monorail running. I should also mention on that right is phenology logs that the drivers used to have to observe sort of what animals that they were seeing. Okay, so real quickly, for this project, we were really talking a lot about, how can a landscape build compassion for wildlife, habitat, and each other, and how can a constructed experience catalyze sort of environmental activism. Some of these key principles were about connection, community, and compassion. We worked with the zoo to kind of refine and define these. They had gone through, we coached them on sort of an open engagement process that they led, and we worked with them to kind of translate that back. Again, a huge team of collaborators, a part of this, structural engineers. We worked with the zoo, with their staff to do sort of the interpretive work, worked with their ecologists, worked with all their back of house people as well. A lot of work just trying to understand how do you design a 1.25 mile long trail. So the monorail being converted into a trail. Richard Serra's dream now sort of dying here, being covered up. But looking at the view intensities, looking at sound and smells, the importance of animals. They have over 500 species of animals that are there. So that was a huge sort of logistical piece of this. And this idea of going from a closed kind of experience with thermal comfort. I'm looking at, I was just thinking about your lecture. And then also to something that's sort of open, and that you can actually see all the animals, you can see all this sort of back of house. So it's also a big transformation of the idea of a controlled view of the zoo. And so what stories should be told from this elevation? Go to the next one.
Skip this.
Yeah. And so as we always do, we tried to understand, like, how do you analyze, and how do you begin to understand this 1.25 miles and the different sort of experiences that can be had of these sort of tracks and these straight stretches and these curves, and all tied to sort of monorail engineering as well. Also, there's an existing ecology that was there called the Zoological Gardens. This is on 500 acres of well-established land. And so reinforcing the things we're doing and how that path overlays these ecologies. Trying to do things, borrowing a little bit from Halprin, but trying to understand how do we sort of begin to orchestrate the experience alongside that 1.25 miles, places for rest, places for observation, sensory sort of moments. And then we needed to find places to connect. We had designed 5, they could sort of fund 4. This was also building during the pandemic, and so the $39 million budget did not go as far as you would think it did. Those are these sort of 4 major sort of transition points that we had, from the trail down. So trying to restitch this back into the zoo was really important. And also this overlay of interpretation, working with the zoo staff to kind of define the overall themes and these different sections that could, based on their ecology and their view sheds, start to be able to interpret and experience different aspects of the trails, the trail itself. And this is just a quick interpretive plan, sort of with features for reference. This is cool. There was a maintenance cart that was a part of this that we drove around on. They also repurposed this thing to build the trail. So you can see them. They would ship in sections, and they built this thing with the cart, which was sort of amazing. Sort of sad that you can't have that tour anymore, but on the cart. But kind of amazing how they did that. Also, the logistics of planting in some of these areas were also complex. So lots of craning in trees, just lots of logistics. The whole thing was like a logistical problem. And then just the set of, I'll just kind of walk you through just a quick through the trail. This is sort of that main entry. No, it's good. This is, you're getting up on the trail. You can see some of that interpretive work that we're doing there. It's about forests and fire. This is we're working, the zoo has a great relationship with the Shakopee Mdewakanton community. We're doing a lot of bison restoration. So this is a ramp down to the bison. Some of that overlay of these trails sort of intersecting those views back out, those longer views that you didn't have before, taking on multiple views of animals at once. This was the bird blind that we designed. So this is to interpret sort of the bird species that aren't in their collection, but actually on this land. And some of those feature details, owls and wood ducks and turtles. And then also moments to reconnect with the land in sort of specific ways. So this is a mindfulness bump out. We're just trying to reframe and pull the forest and back into the trail. The idea of connecting with nature and playing along that path being super important. Next. And then just, the holistic, this 1.25 mile long trail has totally transformed the zoo. Their visitorship is up. It's now a framework where they can actually leverage it to connect to land that they were sort of disconnected from before, which is pretty amazing. And probably even equally amazing, next photo, is one of our graphic designer, Al. He got to design the zoo map. So the kid growing up at the zoo, this was like his dream come true, to design that sort of map of the zoo now with the treetop trail stitched back in.
Okay, we're going to skip that one. So thank you. Sorry, we went over, but we would love your questions. We were going to prompt you all to give us some questions, but also got a little off track in the beginning there, so forgot to ask you to do that. But tell us, we would love to answer questions. So any?
Yeah.
Yeah, top. Of these projects? I don't know. Favorite one? I thought this one was pretty fun to watch. I was less involved in it, so.
I mean, I think there's like some that where I mean, fun. I mean, there's fun, and then there's like learning, and then there's like working with communities, and so like it's different. So I don't know. I feel like there are children. It's hard to pick. I always tell my daughters like that they're my favorite older or younger daughter. So that's You know, so I almost say with the sequence with that was my favorite second project.
This was maybe the most fun one, and the others had maybe a different kind of heart-wrenching meaning. So our relationship to it is different and important, but less fun.
Yeah. But favorite in terms of, I think with both those projects, with Rondo and Fort Snelling, I mean, some of those were windows into like deep relationships with communities, you know, with the Black community in the cities and with the indigenous communities. Like those were early on, you know, so those both have, I think, a place, you know, in our hearts just for like the expansion of our own knowledge about these communities and the way in which I think design intersecting with them, you know, the limits of design, certainly, but also like just feeling connected to those stories and those people and those places.
Okay, so we'll start left there and then move across.
Thank you for your presentation. My first question is the project of the Dakota community. After the project was completed, did you guys ever circle back with that community and collect some feedback and criticisms?
Yes. Yeah, we're actively working with them on several projects right now. Them, when I say them, sort of those tribal historic preservation officers, which are kind of our base filter, and then there's a bunch of other kind of community members that we continue to partner with on other things. But I've been able to ask the TIPOs on a number of occasions, and our co-developers who helped us write a lot of the interpretive work. Do you visit the site? Has it changed your relationship, which was the whole point, was to make them feel more comfortable to want to go there, which they didn't in the beginning of that project. And I think the answers they have are yes, but you know, there was limitations to this budget. There was legislature that got in the way that actually really impeded their renaming process. So there's political turmoil in all of these, and that one is the most difficult. While we were able to do a lot, we did not do what we set out to do in the beginning, and they felt that along the way. So I think they hold on to that as they know what it could have been, which we don't present that part, but it's a great question. And that's a little heartbreaking for me, I think, to know that. And there's a couple stories actually that were erased out of the storyline completely, that were written and proposed and didn't ever get built. And we don't even have the full story for why that happened. So those are some of the lingering realities, but it's a great question.
I would say that some of these projects are on the edge of change, and communities taking ownership and having a voice, and organizations trying to figure out what that means. And even when Maura is talking about that legislative funding, they basically cut the project in half because of the renaming. So, you know, those are just things, completely out of, you know, in funding, how money moves is a whole other, I think, can be a tragic part of this process, in some of these projects.
Yeah. Okay, Leonard, you, and then we'll jump down to you two.
Yeah, so I have a question about the initial outreach to communities. I was hoping you guys could talk more about like your experience, what kind of methods have you used.
Sure. I can speak maybe to the tribal partnerships anyway. So with the historic Fort Snelling, that was the client building that relationship and leading those conversations, and then us joining the client to facilitate conversations, deepen them, honor them, show those partners how we were listening, and then kind of working in more working group format. So like we worked predominantly with the Inamaka, which means sort of translates as Mother Earth group, to build the planting palette, to determine all the artwork and interpretation. They were our kind of clients on that. In later projects, I mean, I think that's still a pretty powerful model. And actually there's another project that's starting to get going in the Twin Cities where that model, I think, is a good one to look at, but they're doing it a little bit differently to start. Otherwise, we have gone to the tribes, each of the 4 tribes, if it's a river project, and we know that the Dakota tribes are the right partners. For example, we've gone to the tribes first and met with them and asked what they think the process should be. And then we'll build the process out from that information, and we'll go to each of the 4 separately. I think another way has just been to work one-on-one with the TIPOs and kind of create a core group of people to advise us, pull them on as a part of the design team, fully paid, and then kind of worked through projects that way. So we have a couple different models and are constantly kind of testing to do them better and better.
Well, I would say so much of it depends on the community that we're working with, who they're connected to, who the community champion is, how, like for the Rondo Commemorative Plaza, they had a board. Basically the design team, most of the design team were children of, or grandchildren of Rondo, represented the community. They were tightly connected. So we're, sort of facilitating, making sure we're drawing and diagramming and being able to help communicate some of that stuff. Versus like the zoo, for instance, where they wanted to lead engagement, we gave them like, here's how you should do it. They wanted to own that and give it back to us, which was fine. So it really sort of depends. Or we're working on George Floyd Square right now, which was, with the city. The process has been led by the city, not in dissonance with the community. And so we've kind of held space for the last year and a half just to help hold space for community to make sure they had power and say over what happens. And so we're really just, a lot of that's holding space or communicating back and forth. So, so much of it is conditional on the project, and it changes in the community too. So, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Okay.
Okay.
I wanted to thank you so much. This is just a total treat. I want to go back to something that Justin said in the introduction about a lot of your methods being aligned with a lot of the stuff that we do here at Milton. And I'm hoping maybe you can connect the dot for a lot of the students in the room. Myself included. You showed all this amazing work at the very beginning, the clay, the photographs, the cyanotypes. Can you talk a little bit about how that works into process?
Mm-hmm.
I think you were more descriptive about the community engagement pieces, and we can see that translating into the work. But to help students understand what the nutritious stuff is, and how it translates into the final work.
Yeah. I think for like a lot of the mud drawings we showed are works that we did down in the river valley, so not necessarily for Fort Snelling, but for Indian Mounds, for another project we're doing called Dakota Homeland Frames. It's an interpretive project for the Minnesota River Cultural Resources Interpretive Plan. Those sort of exercises, experiments down in the river were ways of spending time on those projects specifically, where our partners asked us to do that. So we had a series of engagements where one was meditation led by an Indigenous partner. Another was these sort of collective mud drawings of spending time in the early morning or in different seasons, for example, making artwork down in the river as a way of being there and of touching the sediment of, so they are more artful. They're not really kind of scientific questions, but they are honoring that request we heard of spending time and learning. And you see, every time you see different birds, you identify different plants, you deepen your knowledge of those spaces, of those landscapes. So yes, that's a good point. That was not well connected, but that was work that was done in the beginning for ways of knowing, I would say, for those River Valley projects. I won't flash to it, but the project we were just about to show, those kind of clay tablets that I showed in the beginning where it said the word feeling, those were actually done for Gallaudet University, which is a deaf and hard of hearing university. So tactility is fundamentally important as part of the sensory experience, and also communicating through sign language. So gesture and imprint, and again, like Braille and everything that you can touch where information can translate through tactility. So we did a series of those slabs working with getting impressions. There was a whole series of sensory workshops that explored isolating senses, a kind of olfactory workshop, a tactile workshop, and a visual photographic workshop. So again, those were more community-based. Actually, I'm just gonna go to one image really fast. Sorry, let's see stuff you didn't get presented. But so like these workshops actually started to make threads similar to those diagrams you actually did for the zoo. I thought those were really beautiful, but this sort of, there's a scale to the sensory experience. So doing these experiments on the site began to allow us to understand the scale of an olfactory kind of sense of sensory abundance, the scale of the visual kind of tactile qualities, and kind of how far you could begin to see texture or color in the landscape, how big that range of sound for a hearing person might be. So this was sort of one of those instances where that early kind of exploration and experimentation directly led into a deeper understanding of the site that was used for design. So the way this gets embedded in this project, I think, is pretty powerful, but it is connected to paving materials, bench materials, sort of drifts of plants that have a sensory experience at the scale that we learned worked. So for example, some things like that. But
I mean, I would say in a way, it's fun to hear our staff talk about it. You know, Katie was talking about this the other day. Like, there's a sort of the qualitative side of doing that, which is just like connecting self with the site and having an experience, and sometimes doing that together and being present, even having a game to play, so that you can unpack or uncover something, and be present for that thing. You know, then I think there is how that then gets, you know, unpacked and assembled and documented and translated as something that is potentially generative. Either whether that's like recalling a memory of a site, you know, or that those were specific plants or materials or something that you touched and you sort of engaged with. So unpacking, you know, some of those pieces in that sort of material-based work. I think in a lot of the photography work that we're doing, you know, is also just like tracing and mapping these landscapes, connecting distance, the body, you know, to the site. And so that's about scale, and that's about, you know, unpacking, you know, the place specifically. And then I would say, you know, for another project that wasn't shown in terms of the realm of photography, but using photography and, you know, like panoramas to document change over time, over the course of, we've done this a few projects, documenting something over 2 years, you know, in a place that, you know, has been transformed, where community had offerings, and then this was under construction, but actually using photography to test and to mark where people were gathering, how people were, you know, placing things and assembling things. The zoo was a lot of video work, and then just trying to, and a lot of sketches of translating like experience, you know, so I think you're missing some of that sort of coding, but that video is directly translated to those diagrams about experience, you know, and then those translated into like a design framework. So I think there's like the qualitative stuff, it gets quantitative, you know, about materials. Sometimes it becomes generative of a design idea or a detail or, you know, sort of a larger framework. So it shows up in sort of multiple ways, but appreciate, yeah, question, yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Just want to say that really appreciate your lecture today. It's so inspiring. I guess my question kind of belongs to this because I'm a landscape architect in practice. So kind of just like your project, kind of fascinating that I want to ask that. So how can you know, a lot of times sounds like you have the fortune to work with clients that can appreciate the experimenting market that you guys bring to the table, right? But sometimes how do you like reveal, you know, or persuade, convey the idea of like bring that artful, playful curiosity to the table, even though they don't want it, you know, like
Yeah.
like, you know, oftentimes, you know, at the beginning of the project, you're like really upfront with them, like this is our philosophy, right? This is what we can bring to the table. Like, how do you start a dialogue?
Yeah, that's a lovely question. I think the dialogue sort of starts often by showing examples of weaving this stuff carefully, knowing the client, carefully into the site analysis work. Like, we're out there anyway, we're doing this stuff. Clients understand what site analysis is, generally.
Or research.
Or research, right? But in site exploration or site reconnaissance. So how do you kind of just fold this in as a part of, like, and it's also a process for us to teach our entire team to be able to speak a slightly different language and to believe in this stuff Not everybody does right away. It can be a little abstract. So this is also an evolution, I would say, that we're learning together and testing. But you weave that in to the site analysis, the research pieces, and then you get a sense for how they receive it. And you can then either push it and directly show how these things start to be generative for design processes, or you may just start to keep things internal to the team itself. One of the projects where our client loved this stuff was the South Dakota Art Museum. It's not public yet, so we can't show that work, but we did cyanotypes and castings and collage photography in prairie potholes all through western Minnesota and South Dakota, and kind of created these themes about threshold and interstitial space and kind of the sky and framing the sky and the identity of South Dakota. And they, as curators of art museums, loved it. So they're like the perfect client for us in this stuff. And we folded all of those into concept themes, and like the whole, they even got the president on board and behind this stuff because he's such an ardent, he like loves the sky and the horizon. So when we're showing him these like collage photographs about like the expansive horizon being framed in this new kind of way the building roof works, he was just like blown away. So it really does depend on the client. When you find a good one, you take it all the way. You spend hours in those prairie potholes doing cyanotypes.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something I think is inherent, like, you know, those early conversations where we're showing each other our artwork and we're like, you know, like I would do that, or what were you asking, or what that material, and so there's something also I think embedded. I mean, it's like we value it, like it is important, it is critical to our process. So I think that's like starting there, like, you know, number one. And then number two is also finding, well, it's clients, but like trusting that it will, you know, it will take you somewhere. I think we trust the process, and every time, and tying that to questions and methods. And as Maura saying, we've gotten smarter about when we share it and when we don't. Or we've had clients come to us because they're like, that's cool. Like, or we presented, like, we want more of that. You know, it was a 100-acre retreat we did in the Northwoods where it was all about the spirit of the project. We were doing these photography transects, and some of our clients that were totally not into that were like, oh, this is really cool. I've never seen the site this way. Or so sometimes those discoveries that you have with clients are sort of phenomenal. We had another residential client. We had done an exhibition on some of our research methods at the university, and we had, you know, kind of the book of the stuff, and right before a residential client project, and so we shared that with them, and they're an artist, and they're like, oh, that's cool. I was thinking about these things. You know, sometimes it's that beginning. So it really, I mean, it's like, specifically we're talking about community engagement methods to communities. I would say some of these research methods to clients and collaborators too, because I would say it's also to share with our collaborators as much as it is with our clients sometimes. So sometimes it gets there too. That's an important way of sharing that kind of dialogue.
In process.
Yes, always.
Well,
9 years in.
Yeah, let's talk again in a couple years,
Yeah.
see if we're doing better.
18 years, we'll have some more to share.
Any other questions? Got a dwindling group. Thank you for sticking with us.
Yeah.
Yeah? Awesome.
Awesome. Thank y'all. Thank you. Thanks for that gracious intro. It's lovely. Yeah. Thanks for coming down. Yeah, it's good to finally meet you in person. Yeah.
Were you both in Rome? Or?
No, actually, when I came back from Rome, Maura had just moved back from New York,
Oh, okay.
and so so that's kind of how we connected.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're both ready to do something different.
You're doing exciting work, especially for, what did you say, 9 years?
Yeah.
It's exciting.
9 years, yeah. No, it's fun
The
to.
last project was really interesting.
It's super cool. When did you start your practice?
12 years ago?
12 years.
Yeah.
Awesome. And
And have you taught alongside the whole?
Yeah, I taught basically always teaching
Okay.
studios, generally 2 studios a year. At one point I was kind of full-time adjunct, like 2 studios in the summer. But then I got the position here
And where were you before here?
Columbia.
Columbia, that's right. I kind of had you in New York. Because I remember when we chatted, I think you were in New York
Yeah, I think
at the time. Because we chatted, I was interested in the Japanese American
Yes, I remember
fellowship,
that.
and I reached out.
I remember
You,
that.
you all had just gotten back
I'm
from
so sorry.
Yes.
Rome, I think.
Yeah.
You were there in like 2016. Yeah.
Then we
Yeah.
applied.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you. All right, we will. Yeah. All right. Thank you. See you.
So we applied to the U.S. Japan Fellowship when we were in Rome because we were so excited about the fellowship.
Yeah.
And then we got it when we were in Rome, and we came back.
That's so cool.
Relaunched the office. We closed the office for Rome. Relaunched it. Did a bunch of work, and then went to Japan. And at that point, we couldn't close the office again, so we were
We
doing
met a lot with students.
for that
and we
period of
had,
time
like,
essentially a
selected
24-hour
student
practice where
most of the stuff for
we
this
have 9
particular
p.m.
memorial
calls
is
with the team
a
at
Black Death
IASC.
civil rights story. And
And
so
that was
we're
brutal.
working mostly with
But,
faculty members.
But that was, it's a really great period.
members that
Yeah.
they're
It's actually what prompted the book
from the larger Black
because we
So
were doing
there's
so
a lot
much
of
thinking
student
about
involved.
this kind of free time
Yeah.
space to do
Yeah.
We did a competition initially.
Oh, yeah.
where
similar
it was more
with
student
Japan. So we're like, we're gonna forget all this stuff that we're talking about. So we started the book,
enjoyed hearing
and then it took us 4 years, which we didn't expect to take 4 years.
yeah, I
It's
know.
a good
That's
question, and there's actually
Yeah.
it's just a good
Um,
reminder that for students.
yeah. Well, I can't actually like even. I mean, I spent a year
relationship
working.
stronger.
I was just
So
making
that
that.
they
Yeah.
And so that's when I came back more and I started talking. I was basically because I was
So you were
undergrad.
there as a landscape?
Yeah,
Okay.
undergrad in architecture, went to grad school,
Okay.
both. And then, but I kind of found art through landscape design. I don't know how to finish that yet.
Yeah.
So art for me was a way of like understanding it because it's so so open ended.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like art, it's like water. It's, so that was really fun way to start. But yeah, so that was 2013.
Oh, good. You were there until
Yeah, I had a mental breakdown for about 9 months, and then I decided. My mom was like, "I think I'm healthy now." She's like, "Let's go to bed."
Oh, good.
Like, I don't know, you're kind of crazy.
It's so crazy. Let's do this. Yeah. So it's been a fun. I mean, it's been a really fun adventure.
Yeah.
And I think.
Important work that you're doing.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, and it's just. I mean, I feel like we're in this moment now where it's like stuff is getting built. You know, we have the work is building on itself. You know, referencing other projects. You know, some details. Sometimes twice, sometimes, and that's okay.
That's okay. You don't need to read everything.
No, not at all. So, but it's been so this is fun for us to be able to come and just have a chance to reflect and
Well, enjoy the dinner. It's,
thank you. Yeah.
So great. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah, thanks for having us. This is super fun.
I hope we can continue the conversation. We'd love to have you back and maybe look at.
Yeah, I mean,
some
you
workshops.
guys have something special
I don't
going
know
on
if
here.
you-
I would just say, like, we've just been walking around like, huh? What? It's just like, also, it's just like the vibe. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just like, people just seem kind and curious and energized. And yeah, and you all as a community, to even the faculty community. We were hanging out with John Davis, went to lunch at Heirloom.
Yep.
And he's like running into other faculty, non-design faculty. I'm like, oh, people know, like, this is crazy. Like, how is it? You'll talk to other people. And, you know, so anyways, it's just, it's been really just a lovely day so
But we
far.
do love like more of that workshop.
Do you?
Yes,
Okay, so
we
we might
do.
have the
So-
bandwidth to take stuff like that on.
Yeah, potentially,
Okay,
and
well,
timing if well in
Let me
advance.
go back and write you an email.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Little
Yeah.
ones and the answers. We have a number of places in our curriculum and our annual programming that I think would be really nice fits, and we would really love to have you back for more than
Cool.
talking plus.
Yeah, well, it seemed to just be a real alignment too
Yeah.
with what you all are doing here, and I think the practice, and so it's fun. It's fun to see a student work today and be like, "Oh, that's really cool," or "You think about it that way," or "These models, can I borrow this model?" Just gonna.
That's great.
So it's just, I think it's just, I think it's just a lot, and it seems like too. I mean, there's a lot of, the program is old and it's sort of new, right? And it seems like there's just,
Yeah, that's a good way of describing it.
it's like it's
over 100 years old, but had almost a full reset about 10, 12 years ago. And so the majority of us came on together and we feel like we're part of a shared project.
That's
yeah,
awesome.
that's awesome.
That's been, I think, for me, having been in other places, unique and special.
Yeah.
Not to be not to be undervalued.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, and not just saying it to say it, but like you can just tell, like,
Oh, that's good.
I
Yeah,
don't
it
know,
feels
just-
different.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah, just even as an outsider. You know,
Hopefully it
doing so
doesn't
much.
show too poorly on the University of Minnesota, which is our.
I know. I just feel like we know too much. We're like, we're just.
It's been a bit
Yeah,
rocky.
It's been a long
Yeah, Karen and
relationship,
Sarah
yeah.
are really people I just think the most highly of. And I know
Yeah.
Sarah's moved on, but he
Yeah.
seems to
He's
keep
still
a hand
connected.
back.
Yeah, we miss him.
Yeah, I mean,
He's
he's
yeah.
a great thinker.
Oh my gosh.
Kind,
Yeah.
kind soul.
Yeah.
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 Well, y'all
Awesome.
have a great meal,
Okay,
and
yeah, thank you.
I
Yeah.
will reach out to you through Justin, and we'll stay connected.
Okay,
Sounds great.
good.
Thank you.
Great to
Thank
see
you.
you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
to see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, of
Appreciate it.
course.
So are you hosting this? Are you going to the Saloni?
I am not.
Okay.
have
I saw
failed.
that.
I know.
I will say I'll just put. I
It's
do
really
want to
fun.
get. I do want to get more engaged. I was doing other things.
Yeah, yeah.
And but I.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'll reach out. But I do
Yeah.
want to get more engaged.
Send me
and
an
things up. Yeah.
Have a good time.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. All right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Yes, that's my.
Okay. Well, double.
Need anything,
Double.
any
Okay.
gadgets or
Okay.
mice or cords.
Yep. Did
This
you?
is
This
yours.
is mine too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Used to teach in this room, and there was always a steady accumulation.
Oh yeah, I bet. Yeah.
It seems like yeah.
Dongles. And
Yeah.
Don't really have that many things, but now I'm like extra conscious about
all
have it.
things.
do I have everything. Okay. And done.
Sorry, we're both like.
It's all good. I was just surprised there were that many things to put in my bag.
did last semester, and it was low-key working. But now we're using those even on this. Oh my god, wait, there's chalk. Oh my god, I'm gonna write your whole schedule on the board. This is crazy. Why am I in here? Okay. I can't do this. Chalk is so weird. Why is it a chalkboard in 2024? Ew, I have dust on my fingies now. Okay.